a single pull of a trigger, releasing a bullet weighing just a few grams. 4 years later, 20 million people were dead. To understand how one isolated shooting in the Balkans managed to ignite a global conflict of this scale, we have to look past the assassination itself. On the surface, pre-1914 Europe appeared stable, but beneath that calm exterior, the continent's major powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, were aggressively competing for territory, colonies, and dominance. To back up these territorial ambitions, every major nation was rapidly expanding its military. They were stockpiling resources, drafting larger armies, and engineering entirely new classes of highly lethal modern weaponry. By 1914, the great powers had meticulously assembled a machine designed for total destruction. It only needed a spark. The core of that machine was the alliance system, a rigid network of defensive treaties divided Europe's powers into two rival camps. These operated on automatic tripwires. An attack on one minor state forced every major power to immediately mobilize. By 1914, the most volatile friction point in this network was right here. The large Austro-Hungarian Empire was rapidly expanding its influence into the Balkans, directly antagonizing fiercely independent Serbian nationalists right across the border. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, representing the exact imperial power the local nationalists wanted to destroy. On June 28th, the Archduke traveled to the Bosnian city of Sarajevo for a highly publicized royal visit. He was taking the symbols of an expanding empire directly into a hostile zone, effectively carrying a lit match into a room filled with explosives. The streets of Sarajevo were crowded for the procession. Scattered among those onlookers were several young conspirators belonging to a secret revolutionary group, positioned along the exact route the motorcade would take. The initial attempt happened exactly as planned. One of the assassins stepped forward and threw a bomb, but he missed. The explosive bounced off the Archduke's vehicle and detonated under the car behind him, injuring several bystanders. The procession halted, the injured were rushed to the hospital, and the royal couple sped away to the safety of the town hall. The plot had failed, and the primary threat appeared to be completely neutralized. The authorities believed the danger had passed. A highly coordinated attack had been thwarted by sheer luck and poor execution, seemingly keeping the volatile European alliance system intact. But after the official ceremony, the Archduke made an unscripted decision. He wanted to visit the injured victims at the hospital. Crucially, local officials failed to inform his driver about the new itinerary. The massive military networks built by the great powers were highly organized, but they were ultimately compromised by the most mundane of logistical errors, a simple failure to communicate directions to a driver. Expecting the original route, the motorcade made a wrong turn onto a narrow side street, taking the open-topped car away from the heavily guarded main avenue. Realizing the mistake, the driver abruptly hit the brakes. As he attempted to engage the reverse gear and back out of the tight space, the engine stalled. Standing just a few feet away, entirely by chance, was a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. He was one of the failed assassins from earlier in the morning, and he had completely given up on the plot. Princip had no idea the route had been changed. Without any prior coordination, the high-value target had effectively delivered himself directly to the conspirator who had abandoned the mission. Stepping up to the stalled vehicle, Princip pulled a pistol from his coat and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. One struck the Archduke, the other hit his wife, Sophie. Both died within minutes. In a matter of seconds, an entirely random alignment of wrong turns and stalled engines bridged the gap between a regional Balkan dispute and an unavoidable global war. The local authorities immediately blamed Serbia for the assassination. On July 28th, exactly 1 month later, Austria-Hungary declared war on the smaller nation, snapping the rigid treaty tripwires that had been set years in advance. The automated mechanics of the alliance system took over. Russia mobilized its forces to back Serbia. Germany kept its promise to support Austria-Hungary. Within days, France and Britain were forcefully pulled into the escalating conflict. In cities across Europe, the initial reaction was enthusiastic. Millions of young men rushed to enlist and boarded trains to the front, firmly believing the fighting would be decisively over by Christmas. Those soldiers were marching into a heavily industrialized meat grinder. They expected cavalry charges and quick victories, but they were about to face weapons engineered for mass slaughter. The very treaties that the great powers had signed to deter aggression and maintain peace had the exact opposite effect. By tying their fates together, they guaranteed that any localized conflict would immediately escalate to maximum global scale. The fighting dragged on for more than 4 years. Armies dug deeply into the earth, creating a vast network of trenches where troops died not just from gunfire, but from disease, exhaustion, and exposure to sub-zero temperatures. Both sides deployed horrific new technologies to break the stalemate. Infantrymen were forced to wear primitive masks to survive clouds of highly toxic poison gas drifting across the battlefields. The landscape itself was entirely destroyed. Early mechanized tanks crushed defensive lines, while millions of relentless, deafening artillery shells shattered the terrain into unrecognizable craters. By the time the guns finally fell silent in 1918, more than 20 million soldiers and civilians had lost their lives. The Austrian, Russian, German, and Ottoman empires collapsed entirely, erasing centuries of imperial rule. The map of Europe was heavily redrawn to carve out newly independent nations. However, the harsh economic and territorial penalties imposed by the resulting peace treaties failed to resolve the underlying friction. Instead, they laid the groundwork for an even larger, more destructive conflict 20 years later. Massive global catastrophes do not always begin with sweeping, continent-wide decisions. Often, a deeply unstable system simply waits for a single wrong turn, a stalled engine,